As the slide says, my name's Joe Viscuso, and I'm a Senior Vice President with Pannoni. And my role at Pannoni is kind of all things top line. So we have Director of Strategic Growth, so top line for us is the strategic initiatives that we get into, and M&As. So any way that we can go, so I always say that my role is top line, our COO's role is bottom line. Everything that we kind of push onto the top line and to make sure he makes sure it makes it to the bottom line, and we kind of meet somewhere in the middle. So some ground rules for the presentation today. Don't try to copy the slides. There's a lot of information. You all got the little cards from PSMJ, so you can pick it up. So don't try to jot everything down. Maybe write down. I'm going to go off slides for kind of my own personal thoughts, because this is about my personal experience in the M&A world. So write down any of the aha thoughts you might come up with. Ask questions at any time. I'd rather stop the presentation and kind of have more of an open dialogue. So if you come up with a question or something pops into your brain, let's talk about it when it comes up. And then lastly, you will not learn the value of your firm here at this, or the value of the guy's firm sitting next to you. It's all about the process. And by the way, when I say guys, I mean guys and gals collectively, so I use the term interchangeably. But it's about the process in terms of what happens going through some of the experiences that I've had in the M&A, and I'll explain that in a second. So where does your firm fit in the buy or sell equation? So these are the questions that we often ask ourselves, and that we know from a lot of the statistics that we've seen. I've heard the statistic here today, or over the couple days here. I was at another conference a couple weeks ago in Florida, and I think there's 143,000 firms in the U.S. 140. I heard Frank say last night 160,000. So we know it's somewhere in that order of magnitude. 99% of them are small firms. So that's an awful lot of firms that are in the small firm list. And these questions I think are going to be asked by a lot of folks over the next couple of years. If you figure that there's 99% of that 143,000 out there, maybe 75% of them are baby boomers. So a lot of thoughts around sort of the whole M&A process, and I think it's going to. The other statistic I heard at the other conference was that we're only about 15% of the way through the baby boomers making their way through the system. So we've got a long time to go. Some of the things you read, it really won't peak until 2025, 2030, kind of in that category. So there's a lot of places that this is going to go over the next couple of years. I also had a lunch meeting last week with another friend of mine that's also in the M&A world, nothing to do with the AEC side of the business, but he sees the same exact thing happening from the space that he sits in. So should we merge? We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the difference between an acquisition and a merger. What's the difference between an M and an A? Okay. When should you buy or sell? Kind of got some thoughts around that. How much should you pay or ask? A lot of thoughts around sort of that side of the equation. Stock sale and asset purchase. So you'll hear a lot of these in the business. So what what is best for you as a buyer or a seller? The assumption of liability. Kind of what happens with the assumption of liability. That's another question that's out there. And how do you limit that liability? And too many questions, not enough answers, and as the old song says, let's call the whole thing off. So you really, your mind and your brain can get like all jumbled up in all of these questions and trying to figure out the answers. But there's if you think about it systematically, there's a way to get through the process. So a little bit about myself in terms of what brings me to give this talk today, and you'll see from my experience. So that's not me. Nice little baby, nice little engineer's hat, but it's not me. So I started with a small consulting firm right out of college, and it was a very small firm, maybe 20, 25 folks. I'm a civil engineer and a licensed surveyor. And then about 6 years later, after I'd gotten my PE and gotten my master's degree, I kind of moved on and took a middle management position with a fast food chain. They're long gone because they got swallowed up in an acquisition a few years later. And then I got antsy, and this is sort of probably the story of my life in terms of getting antsy. And I decided to start my firm in 1979 in the middle of a recession. And I remember running into a lawyer friend of mine in Kmart, of all places, and told him I had just started my firm in 1979, 1980, and he said, "We're in the middle of a recession. Why would you do that?" I said, "I don't know. I never gave any thought to the recession. I just started a firm." So with that that was my investment in terms of starting the firm. Myself and a partner, about $375 a piece is what you didn't have computers then. We needed a couple pencils and some paper, and we needed to rent an office. But basically that was to get the articles of incorporation drawn up to start that firm. The name of that firm at the time was Brandywine Valley Engineers. And then in 1988, I was approached by my partner. So this is where the deals started to happen for me in terms of being more entrepreneurial. So in 1988, I was approached by my partner. He was older than me. I think age, we'll talk a little bit about age as we go through this presentation. So he was older than me, and at the time we had grown to about 20 people. And he said, really, I like working here, but you're really the rainmaker for the firm. You're younger. Why don't you consider buying me out? So I had to go to the bank and borrow money. Another first transactional piece for me, having to do something like that. Went to the bank and borrowed the money, and I came up with a deal to buy him out. And then in 1992, I actually made my first acquisition. So I was operating in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is very municipally oriented, and I wanted to get into Chester County, which is where I live today. And so I made my first acquisition. I went to a business broker that I had worked with in the past, and talked to him and said I really was interested in trying to expand my geography, and could he approach a couple of firms out there in terms of seeing if they were interested to sell. So he found me a small firm, 6 people, and I did the acquisition. So that was my first acquisition in my firm. And then in 1997, I had grown that firm to 50 people. I had the 2 offices, and I was approached by a firm in New York, by Zwag out of Boston, to find out if I wanted to merge or sell my firm. At the time, they had 300 employees, and I remember thinking to myself, well, geez, they had sent a search letter out to I think several hundred firms in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware market, and so I kind of had my own firm, was doing very well. I was making good money, and but I kind of thought about, geez, what's my future here? Where do I want to go? What happens if I walk across the street and I get hit by a car? What happens with my family? A lot of these things went through my mind. But the real thing that came through my mind was, how am I going to ever survive in this large firm, this big engineering firm with 300 people? And today, by today's standards, that 300 number is sort of not considered a large firm. But back then it was, and it was kind of scary. So I decided at the time that I was really too young to sell and just walk away or sell outright, and that I would probably, if I was going to do anything, maybe I would consider a merger. So we had this whole idea of kind of what is a merger versus a sale came into play, and so that was my first deal with my firm, where we looked and we put a merger deal together, and I merged into that firm. The interesting thing about it, so kind of what is, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So from the merger perspective, we did a valuation of both firms. We had an outside valuator do the valuation. We did a valuation of both firms. We came up with a value. And so I was able to take the value of my firm. I did walk away with some cash from the deal, but I was able to take the value of that firm and work it into a partnership interest with the firm in New York. And then there were 8 of us at the end of the day that owned that firm. And we had about equal interest in about 12% of the firm. And so from 1997 to 2007, we did a series of probably 10 other acquisitions, all of which I was on our committee. There was 3 of us that did the mergers and acquisitions. So we had another 10 transactions that grew the firm from the 350 that merged firm that we put together, and grew that firm up to 650 employees. And that was Vollmer Associates in New York, if anybody knows the company. So, and at the time, in 2007, albeit any of us that have been in the industry know that they were very, very good years. So that was a good year. They were good years to really grow a firm, and we were able to take advantage. But I think the real strength of our growth, yes, some organic, but the real strength of our growth came through those 10 transactions that we did, finding what I call boutique firms in nice markets, and using those firms to the equation of in any merger or acquisition. You hope at the end of the day that 1 + 1 = 3, and that's kind of what we were trying to get out of those deals that we did. And then in 2007, we were purchased by Stantec. And so I always tell people I got to sell my firm twice, right? So I did the first sale in 1997, or the merger, and then the legacy of that firm into Vollmer, and then the sale of that entire entity to to Stantec. And then in the earn-out years with Stantec, contractually I was obligated to be there for 5 years. So from 2007 to 2012, I spent my time at Stantec, and that was a great experience for me. Again, on the M&A side, because Stantec does about a deal a day, and so and although they baked those sales in Canada, and I wasn't part of the financial side of those deals, I was part of the integration side, and I really learned a lot in terms of how to really integrate a firm into another firm. So I was probably involved in another 10 or so integrations all across the U.S. and Canada. So another great experience for me. So, and then in 2012, when my 5 years, I do not have. People ask me about, why did you leave Stantec? I actually loved my experience there. I got to do some really great projects that I wouldn't have got. I think that's the one thing that through all of my experience that I think has really been great for me is that. Yes, I've been on the transactional side to be involved in a lot of merger and acquisitions, but at the end of the day, I'm still an engineer. I still do projects. I still have projects that I do today. I still manage projects. And every one of the moves professionally, I was able to move on to bigger and better projects with more geography that I could cover. So I was able to win projects at Vollmer that I would never have gotten with my small firm, Brandywine. I was able to win projects with Stantec that I would have never gotten with Vollmer. So from a professional standpoint, I think that's another plus that comes out of the M&A experience, is that you really get to expand your reach, both professionally and geographically. So 2015, here I am, and that is me. I'm the first picture, right? So a little bit about definitions, and we're not going to go through all this. The real key things are, what are the key words here? So a merger and acquisition, pretty obvious stuff: buying, selling, dividing, and combining of different companies. Enterprises grow more rapidly. You get into new fields or new locations. These are all the key things as to why you would want to do a merger or an acquisition. All of the things that leads to the consolidation in the industry. And then the distinction between a merger and acquisition, because I think a lot of times we see M&A all the time, but there is a real distinction between it. And sometimes a deal that is an acquisition for legal purposes may be euphemistically called a merger of equals if both CEOs agree that joining together is in the best interest of both their companies. So what does all that mean? Sometimes we say things are a merger because it's the politically right thing to do. But at the end of the day, company A has to buy company B, or B buys A, but you may, out to the outside world, you may say that you've merged the two companies, especially companies that are of the same size. A 10-person firm is not going to buy a 1,000-person firm. That's pretty obvious. But if two 300-person firms get together, or some like firms, you may call something a merger that really isn't a merger. But remember back to my situation with my firm Brandywine going into Vollmer, that was a true merger. And so there are times when mergers make sense. But I think a lot of times we use the terms interchangeably. There are legal differences. So here's a high-level outline of the process. So, how do you meet firms? I probably get firms coming across, I call it like the first date, right? I probably get without even leaving my office, I probably get, maybe 5 to 10 a month, believe it or not, inquiries from folks that know that we're on the buy side of the equation, and trying to find out if we have any interest. But you have this sort of first date, and it really is like a courtship. The first date is sort of the meet and greet. You may have a non-disclosure signed at that time, but it's really just sort of, how do you feel about each other, kind of what it looks like, and it kind of just sort of, and then you sign an NDA, and you really exchange some very, very high level information. We really try. My experience is that you really don't want to get into the weeds at the first exchange of information. So we tell folks that we're really not looking for employee names, we're not looking for client names, we're really looking for financials the last 3 to 5 years, really high-level stuff that we want to get into, so that we can just sort of kind of peek under the covers a little bit. And then you kind of frame the deal with a letter of intent. Now, I've seen this go a bunch of different ways. I will tell you that a lot of times folks talk about how long does it take to do a deal. Deals can take 1 month. They don't need to take a long time. When we first met Stantec, it was in the fall of 2006, and We had signed our letter of intent for all intents and purposes January 1st of 2007, and we completely transferred ownership of the firm on April 1st, 2007. So really less than a 6-month period, we transferred an entire 650-person organization into Stantec, and it went, very seamless. So I think, though, in terms of timing, I would really rather get this out on the table very quickly. Very, very high level, letter of intent. This is kind of the way we see framing the deal. But I would rather do that than to do the deep dive of the due diligence information. Yes.
How close are you trying to get initially on the price?
What I try to say is that it's going to be an order of magnitude, right? That's kind of what that first kind of offer is out there. It's an order of magnitude that we want to get. We want it. The values in our firm, they're not going to be. A firm is worth what it's worth, right? So we try to get within an order of magnitude to make sure that it's kind of throwing that initial bait into the water, but we just want to make sure that we're on the same page. A lot of people have unrealistic expectations, and I'd rather know that going in, and I'd rather them know our expectations going in very early in the process. So we just don't spend, as I just told you, I can see 5 to 10 deals a month from where I sit, and I'd rather not spend a lot of time if there's an unrealistic expectation on either side of the deal. So I think the best answer is it's an order of magnitude, and it's a very, very high level outline of kind of where we see the deal going. Okay. And then you really do what I call the serious dating. Now you're really taking that deep dive into really looking at the client. But if you can't get past this, if you really can't get past the letter of intent, in my opinion, there's no sense really going to the due diligence side of the table, because you're going to ask for a lot of information, you're going to get a lot of information, and I just think it's not worth the time going back and forth if you can't get past that initial kind of outline of the deal. Difficulties will arise. Expect them, deal with them, and if you love each other, you will survive. Okay, and you'll get to the altar. Now, I think this is again. The idea here this morning is just to talk about sort of experiences, right? God, they're deals. Just you think you got it, then you don't have it, and then then this comes up, and then that happened, and you didn't know about this, and then you heard about that. And I remember, going back to the Volmer deal with Stantec on a Sunday afternoon. I think I might have had the Eagles game on. Talking to both of my partners, we basically had thrown up our hands and said we'll just never get there. But you sort of just keep going. You just sort of keep going. You're chugging. If you love each other, you will survive. I mean, that's really it at the end of the day. If two sides want to negotiate a deal, then the deal will get done. Okay, you'll find ways around those problems. But there's highs and lows. You're real euphemistic on the deal, and then geez, I can't wait to get out of here. I'm not going to, hope I never see these guys again, or whatever. But if you really want to get there, you will get there, and you just have to expect that every deal. I've never seen one that went smoothly from beginning to end, or some monkey wrench didn't come into it from left field that you didn't expect. But if you just keep working on it, if it's meant to happen, it'll happen.
Joe, in the LOI, you talked about price, but what about structure, stock versus assets?
It's all lined out,
right there.
Right? It's all lined out for us in that deal. Yep. And we're gonna talk a little bit about stock purchase versus asset in a minute. So where do you start? First decision, right? Is are you a buyer or are you a seller? Again, I think there's a lot of firms out there that are really on the fence on that in terms of where they want to be. Are you a strategic buyer? Okay, so we hear this term a lot. If you're a strategic buyer, a firm may be, you may be willing to pay a little bit more for a firm than maybe somebody else because you really want that geography, you really want that expertise, you really want, whatever. So the term strategic buyer will be used a lot, right? No matter which you are, you need to do your homework in advance. The more you know, the more you'll be able to control the outcome. You really want to be in the driver's seat. So spend some time understanding what the parameters are, know kind of what your values are, know what you're willing to spend, and again, are you a buyer, a seller, or are you a strategic buyer? Which side of the equation are you going to be on that'll make you the most comfortable? So you're a buyer, right? If your strategic plan is to grow your firm, you're of the age that can benefit from growth. It takes time to grow this way, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about age here in a second too. You have the capital. Obviously, you need the capital to make it happen, all right, on the buyer side. And then you have the preservations to plant the seed, water it, and watch it grow, because it is a long process. You're not going to. It's almost again, my experience is the first year in a deal. The first year is a throwaway. It's kind of like if you're a golfer, it's your mulligan. You as much as you don't want to be disruptive to the firm you're purchasing, you're going to be disruptive. As much as you think you're going to be integrated in very quickly, if you're the seller, it's not going to be the same. Okay, and you try not to be disruptive, but you will be. It's just human nature. People are trying to impress you. You're trying to impress them. People are doing things that they maybe didn't do before, even though you tell them to keep doing the things that you used to do. Don't change anything. There's just a feeling back and forth both ways. So again, on the buyer side, you have to be very, very patient because this is something that just takes time. And then you have the culture in place that can accept growth from without and not just from within. Again, this is a very important concept on the buyer side. You really have to have that culture that understands that I'm buying something, it's different from what we had before, it's in different geography, it may be a different discipline, and I've got to spend a lot of time making sure that firm is integrated correctly into my firm. And so you really have to have that culture in place that will be able to accept the fact that this is the way you're going to grow the firm. It's very easy to, as a firm grows, it's very easy to, and again, I've been there, it's very easy to just keep hiring people. You hire them one at a time, and you get time to, they come in, they immediately see the culture around them, and they kind of get lockstep right into your corporate way, your corporate practices. But all of a sudden you go over here and you buy another company that's completely and totally different, and they won't have that culture. No matter how much you tell them about they won't have it, and it takes time to make that work back and forth. On the seller side, if you have no logical in-house heir to the throne. Now, this is something that I hear. I think this is the most prominent thing. I heard a little bit about it this weekend. It's one of the things that I hear most anymore is that I have this really nice firm, but I really don't have there's nobody in place. The next generation doesn't have the time, doesn't have the inclination, doesn't have the money, does not want to get involved in purchasing the firm. And I think this is really the dynamic that's going to be out there for the next 5 to 10 years in our industry. So you want to be part of a large organization for personal and professional growth. This is really what motivated me back in 1997. Sitting there in my small office, I was probably making as much money in 1997 with my own firm as maybe I am today. I don't know, but I really had this urge to grow professionally, and I wouldn't be here today had I not gone through all those experiences. I wouldn't have worked on projects like the World Trade Center. When the towers came down, we were one of the first firms there, for 9/11. I've had projects nationally all over the country that when I was at Stantec, with 125 offices in Canada and the U.S., I could go after clients that I couldn't go after at Volmer. So for me, that was the real driver. I really wanted this personal and professional growth. I wanted to be able to get my hands dirty in much bigger and different projects than I was going to get as a small 50-person firm in Southeast Pennsylvania with 2 offices. I mean, maybe today I would have had, the story I'll tell you is that when I did this, that story of 1 + 1 = 2. So as I said back in 1997, I had 2 locations and 50 people. But you as a firm, you hear this often. I was in a place where I was too big to be little and too little to be big, so I couldn't compete with the larger firms in terms of going after larger projects, and then the smaller firms were knocking my socks off going after the projects I traditionally went after. So I was kind of in that space in between. So having done the merger with Volmer, now I had their resume and another 300 people behind me and their resume of projects. And before we did I told you we grew from the 350 up to 650. I was the partner in charge of our Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware market. Right before the merger, I had 5 offices with 125 people. So again, that's how quickly I grew in that 10-year period in the Philadelphia market. I would not have been able to do that. I probably would have been bigger than I was at 50, but I wouldn't have been at 125 people with 5 locations. So we opened an office in Center City, Philadelphia. We opened an office in Maryland. We opened an office in Delaware. So all of that was possible. So again, this was the real driver for me. So you lack the capital to grow your firm on your own. Very difficult, right, on the seller side. You want the ability to move your area of expertise to a new geography. So suppose that you have a really niche practice and you're doing really good work, but you're kind of constricted by the geography that you can take that to. So a good way to spread that niche market to other markets, both in the U.S. and internationally, is to sell your firm. And then your age is hinting that you should consider options. Now, age is very, very important to a buyer, for those that don't know that, right? Because most deals are structured as earn-out deals, and we'll talk about that again here in a minute, but very, very important on the buyer side for the age of the acquiring. I visited an office in Boston, and a firm that we were looking to purchase, and they were since purchased, so that's okay. But I visited, and I think all 4 sellers, I think the youngest was like 68 years old, and they literally had their bags packed at the front door. As soon as you purchase this, we're out of here. And I said, well, that's a good thing, but this business is about relationships. It's about the relationship that we're not widget builders. If we were widget builders, then it would be very easy to buy a company and your widget guys can come in and build their widgets. But our business is about relationships. It's about personal relationships, and it takes time to move those relationships. They don't happen overnight. I have clients that I've had, and I expect a lot of folks in the room, clients that we've had forever, that really trust us as professionals. And so you can't just say that, okay, I'm here, boom, you can handle it and you take it from here. So you can't. So that age is very important on the seller side and on the buyer side. Seller preparation, clean financials, scrub the balance sheet. So again, as small companies, we know that we can do anything we want to that since we're the king or queen of that domain. Country club membership, wife's car, kids' cell phones, whatever you want to pay for out of the business. You own the building. You're renting back to yourself at a premium. All those kind of things are on your financials. They really have to have clean. You got to really scrub the balance sheet because the buyer is not going to be interested in any of that stuff. Right, so you got to make sure that at least segregated on the balance sheet, so you can say that I know that this stuff is here and it's going to come out over there, and but that's not going to happen. There's very little of that stuff that's going to survive a deal. Clean the office. It's like I can't believe that I have to say this, but I can't. You wouldn't sell your house and not clean your house when a potential buyer's coming in or the real estate agent's coming in. A lot of offices that I go into, they just look sloppy. And to me, that sets the tone, right? So if you are a buyer and you're prepping yourself, you really need to clean the office because appearance matters. What does staff know and how will you introduce the visitor? I've been an auditor. I've been, Uncle Joe from up in Pennsylvania. I've been, Cousin Joe, whatever the case may be. But, again, doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is a big deal. You're going to have people walking around your office. What does your staff know? What do you want to tell them? How you're going to introduce that person? You're going to meet them off-site, maybe for that first date, whatever the case may be. But the whole idea of the introduction and to when to involve staff is very important in the equation, right? The staff announcement. So if you kind of get through everything and you're down to the point where you're talking about like sort of announcing to your staff, I always say that you do not want to make that announcement without the buyer being right there with you, and not only the buyer, but everyone from the HR department should be right there, because when you make an announcement to staff, the first thing that staff they're going to immediately go to, what does this do for me? Jim's selling the firm, and okay, Jim made a great deal, but what about my salary? What about my benefits? That's their mind. So you really want to be standing there in tandem, and so what we typically do is literally we do the deal, we make the announcement to the staff. Senior staff may have already been clued in. That's another matter. We make the announcement to staff. I answer any general questions that may be out there, and then the rest of the day or 2 days is spent with our HR folks meeting with each and every employee individually and going over their benefits, their salary, giving their letter of engagement, so that they know all is good for them and they don't have to worry about anything. But a small point, but a very, very big point, because everything goes sour here very quickly. Client involvement and announcements, sort of when do the clients get brought into the equation here? A lot of times in the due diligence, the buyer will want to talk to some clients just to get a gut feel and make sure that that you're hearing the same thing from the clients that the seller is portraying to you. But you really want to make sure that from the client involvement that you know, and then client perception. Again, my caution is that anybody that's on the selling side, expect to lose clients and expect to lose employees. On the buyer side, expect that you're not going to get all the employees, expect you're not going to get all the clients. And why? It's just that clients are going to say, well, geez, you know, you're with a bigger firm now. I liked you when you were a small firm. Really, I don't think I'm going to use your service. You're going to charge me a lot more than what you did before. Yeah, I like working with you, but you know, you're going to be a different. You're moving up in the organization. You're not going to be there for me anymore. I think that at the end of the day, in these particular instances, both those employees that leave and those clients that leave probably were looking for a reason to leave anyway. Okay, and you know, you sort of just, you know, wipe your hands, and if you can save them, fine. But at the end, it's just the expectation going in that I think that both of these things will usually happen in a deal. So how do you start? So whether you're a buyer or a seller, obviously you have to know your value, right? They're not really one. This is the kind of a pet peeve of mine, obviously, but like not all M&A, accounting, and legal firms know how to value a professional service firm, and it's sort of probably the biggest obstacle that we run into, because it's, you know, you walk in and say, well, my lawyer said I was worth 700 times EBITDA, you know, or whatever, and you know, the accounting firm says, you know, whatever, and it just so you really have to do your own homework. Okay, there's information out there. So depending on what you bring to the dance floor, you can spend more if you're a buyer and you don't really do your homework and don't know what's going on. You can spend less. It can be really a sharp negotiator and spend less. You can sell for more. You can sell for less. But know your dance partner and dance the right dance. Okay. So you really want to make sure that you've done your own homework. You know what other firms have sold. There's so much information. PSMJ publishes all kinds of stuff around this, and other like organizations. So you can get on the internet and understand 100 deals very, very quickly. Seller value. So you're going to have, as a seller, you're going to have different values for different firms depending on your needs and strategy. Now, you asked a question earlier, but that value is still within an order of magnitude. I mean, but you know, it's not going to, you know, $32.98. It's just not the way it works. So there are different values for different firms. So there's a number of factors you'll hear. I told you that today this is not about sort of how do you value a firm, but there's factors that times the number of employees that you have, so much times each employee will give you a number, so much times net revenue will give you a number, so much times profit will give you a number. So time book value, backlog is another indicator in terms of how to come up with value. And you can a number of publications, you can find any of these things. And again, at least it's a back of the envelope, at least it's an order of magnitude, at least it gets you in the right ballpark to understand what your true value is. And from whether you're a seller or you're a buyer, right, everybody's going to the same, using the same information. So it's not rocket science at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you're worth what you're worth. What's the deal? What's the best negotiation you can make to put the deal together? Whether you're the buyer or you're the seller. So from the buyer value, first decision is what role will the firm fill in your organization. So I'm on the buyer side now. How important is this firm to me in terms of what I want to? Is it valuable geography? Is it a new market sector that we're really looking to capture? Are there necessary employee disciplines? More employees to handle backlog? You just want to grow. Any one of these things can add to the value of the deal on the seller side, or what a buyer is willing to spend. I believe that all of the numbers indicate, the numbers don't lie. The fact that I think last year at this conference, Frank or Dave asked the question, who in the room was looking for employees? And I think if we asked that same question today, it would be everybody in the room. So we're all in the same boat. And then I saw another statistic at the conference that I was just at in terms of those 5 to 10 to 15-year employees. You can go back and statistically look at college graduates back to and there was a lull in there where there were no graduates coming out of the educational systems providing engineers, and so those people just aren't out there. Okay, the statistics show that they're not out there. A lot of them left during the recession. A lot of folks left the engineering business or the architectural business altogether. Right? So they're just not out there. We're all going to be fighting for the same people. I think it's going to add to, as we heard yesterday, it's going to add to the hourly rates that we're going to pay. But this is a big reason why firms are looking to grow, just to get bodies and to be able to say, we can fill in soft spots. If our Florida office is low on work, we can get that work from our Pittsburgh office, and you can fill in those gaps and highs and lows with people as long as you have the right talent in the right place. So asset purchase, most buyers prefer an asset purchase. I know that's our preference, is to do an asset purchase. It limits the liability as a buyer. The asset purchase, basically, if you're doing an asset purchase, you're saying that as of the day of settlement, we're going to own all the liabilities going forward, you own all the liabilities going backwards. And so most buyers will prefer an asset purchase. They're not really that difficult to negotiate. There's just only a few moving parts in it. Usually it will include an earnout with different kind of KPIs attached to that earnout. So what's the earnout mean for those that aren't familiar with the term? It just means that we're going to pay a certain amount up front, and then we're going to structure the deal based on some KPIs that the rest of the money is going to be paid out over a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year period, or whatever's negotiated. But that's the earnout part of the deal on an asset purchase. And there are many variations to get to a bottom line that will create a win-win. So I think the question was asked earlier about we're putting out that initial LOI very, very early in the process, but don't expect that by the time we get to the end of the deal and the real agreement of sale, so many things will have changed in that LOI that it won't even look the same. Very few of them survive all the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the negotiations. But again, if you want the deal to work, you'll make it work. You'll find ways to get to that bottom line to create the win-win. And then on the stock sale side, basically it's again very, very high level. Buyers buying everything, right? Buying the corporate name. Going back on the asset purchase side, the buyer is generally buying the right to use the name. The corporate name, that corporate entity, still stays with the seller. So I think last year I merged my firm in 1997, and because of the structure of the deal, I still had to collect. That was an asset purchase, so I still had to collect some of my old receivables, and so I think just about 3 months ago, so almost 20 years later, if I do the math, I closed the bank account that I had at a bank with like $300 in it, because that bank account was sitting there with my old corporate name on it, just in case some old receivable came in that it was the only way for me to cash the check. So on the asset purchase side, the corporation lives with the seller, and that corporate entity kind of lives with the seller. But if you go to an asset purchase, the corporation is transferred entirely to the buyer. And then liability obviously goes to the buyer, because you're buying it lock, stock, and barrel. And there's a lot more legal issues to contend with on the liability side. The buyer is going to want every I dotted and every T crossed in many more details than the asset purchase, because the asset purchase kind of cuts that limited liability right at the day of settlement. Big key though, whether it's an asset purchase or a stock sale, discuss with your financial advisor and avoid making the IRS a surprise partner in the deal. Okay, you really, really, really have to be careful of this one, right? Is because at the end of the day, I was surprised by taxes a couple times in a couple of my negotiations. So that's just sort of my big red flag, is to make sure that you are aware of what Uncle Sam is going to take out of the deal. You can't avoid it. It's there. There are ways to mitigate it, and that's kind of what you're looking to do, is to find ways to mitigate it. Jim?
Which version is most common?
Asset.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, that's most deals that I see are asset purchases.
Doesn't it, it's an obvious question, favors the seller to do a stock purchase?
The seller probably would. I would say that the seller probably would prefer a stock purchase, because you're sort of just getting rid of everything. But I think that the seller may get a higher value on an asset purchase, because the buyer is willing to be it doesn't have to be as careful, right?
All this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And what you find out on stock purchases, right, is they tend to have a lot of KPIs or buckets, as they're called. So if this happens, then 2 years later you'll get this, and if this happens, then 2 years later you'll get that. And because there's a lot of promises that are made at the settlement table, and so the buyer is saying, I'm willing to pay them, but only if they come out to what you said they were going to come out to. Because now I've got to take the liability of saying, well, you've got $200,000 in receivables. How good are those receivables, right? I don't know. You're saying, well, I'm telling you they're good. I'm the seller, right? I'm telling you they're good. And I'm saying, well, I don't know that they're good. And that's in the value of this deal. So I'm willing to pay you X amount of money if 2 years from now I've collected $200,000 of those receivables. Or you build out your WIP or contracts don't. So there's so many more things. Liability. I'm willing to I have to now assume the liability of any projects. And I'm talking about E&O liability. I've got to assume that liability. So if I don't have any lawsuits for the next 5 years, then there'll be a bucket here waiting for you to take that money out, right? If I don't have any lawsuits. I don't have to worry about that on the asset purchase.
Are those completed projects, or like the day that you do the asset purchase, you're assuming all ongoing projects?
Correct.
That gets assumed by the new guy.
I always say, what we always say, and that's a good question, what we always say is that the day that, let's suppose the project is 99.9% complete, and the day after the design,
Okay.
and the day after the deal, one of my designers puts 1 hour on the project, okay? And then that project goes out and something happens. We own that liability because we had that 1 hour on the project. We're just the way it's going to happen, the way our carrier is going to get involved. We own that liability. So the first hour we put on the project buys us all the liability, even though we did an asset purchase to limit the liability. But if you have a project that's 2 years old, or something that's kind of hanging, and the other caution is that on the seller side, if you have any whisper, any inkling, any kind of any project that's out there that somebody said, well, I got to look, you bring it to your carrier's attention before the deal, because all that will be covered under prior acts. So if there's just any inkling out there of things, you want to make sure that they're put on the table.
So in the due diligence, do they segregate all the projects and say, well, that one's in construction, that's yours?
It really just comes to me. It just comes down to time cards. It's like you own every. The only way that I'm brought in as a buyer on an asset purchase is if I've got time on that project after the day of I had anything to do with the design at all. So if I don't show any time cards with any people ever having worked on the project, then I don't own any liability. So and there's ways to cover all that. There's tail policies and all kinds of things that get into that, and they are expensive. And again, it's something you don't want to lose sight of because they are expensive. Merger versus acquisition. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Tomato versus tomato. There are legal differences. I talked a lot about it. Sometimes it just comes down to semantics. You just say that we merged the two companies because that's what you want the world to think. How do you want to market the deal internally and externally? In the end, it can be it really can be a legal merger though, because I've done one. So you can really have a legal merger. Culture. Culture, finances. Culture trumps finances, okay? I think that it's very easy to do a deal. It's very easy to say, you want $5, I pay. We're all engineers, scientists, architects, technical people, accountants, whatever the case may be. The financial part of the deal is very easy, can be negotiated, and we all understand it at the end of the day. You want $5, I'm going to pay you $5, okay? What you can't negotiate is culture, right? You can't. So in my opinion, the deals that I've seen fail, and I've seen a couple of them fail, all right? Not everyone goes 100% right. The deals that I've seen fail on culture. They don't fail on finances. I mean, it'd be really strange for a deal to, I guess you could argue over the earn-out, or something like that. That's why, again, going back to that earn-out portion, you want to make sure that the KPIs are very, very, they're understood by everybody, so there is no argument to the KPIs in terms of how you're getting the earn-out. But you can't negotiate culture, right? There's no way. And to me, this is the most important part of the due diligence more than the financials. Accountants will look over, lawyers will look over the financials, everybody will be satisfied with all that stuff. You make a decision, you say, okay, we're going to let that go, we're not going to worry about collecting that debt, we're not going to, you can negotiate all that stuff. You really want to spend your time in the due diligence on culture. How do you do business? How do they do business? Right? And be prepared to walk away if the deal doesn't feel right. I mean, I almost know from that first visit with somebody that there. I went and looked at a firm in Pittsburgh, and boy, they were a nice firm. I really liked them a lot. Okay, they did our kind of work. They were making good money, but they didn't fill out time cards. Okay, the guy said, I don't need time cards. I give the client a lump sum, and he was making, his financials were really good. And but I said, we'll blow him out of the water. His people will be so ticked off the minute they have to do their first time card. He'll be ticked off. I just knew right off the bat that was a cultural mismatch that would never work. Okay, despite everything else that I thought was going to be right with the deal and the financials. So you really got to be prepared to walk away if a deal doesn't feel right. And again, I can almost make that feel at the first time I meet somebody, whether it's going to meet. But I can't. I could spend the entire hour on the cultural differences in a company. Carl.
Quick question. If a larger firm acquires a smaller firm, does it just happen that the larger firm's culture ends up being the culture?
No. You could take cultural values from either side. There's good and bad to be gained from both sides of the deal. So I don't think you can automatically assume that our culture is going to be their culture, because but you just want to make sure that they're going to mesh cultures. But if you have conflicting cultures like that, I know it sounds stupid, but that time card culture was a conflicting culture that would just never have worked. I just knew that. Okay, but I think that you certainly can take cultural values from the smaller company into the big and vice versa. And by the way, this is not an endorsement of Donald Trump. So, but it's the only name to fit there. Couldn't say culture, Bush, finance. More on culture. It just doesn't happen. Okay, it's a little bit about what we just talked about. It just doesn't just happen. You got to work on it. It can't be forced. Going to your point, this is the way we do things. Because again, it'll just. Stantec bought a really nice niche boutique kind of firm out in Colorado, and I was part of the integration. And geez, the guys there, they did great work. They worked all over the world, and it was about, for Stantec, it was a kind of a crazy acquisition because it was only like a 10, 15 person firm. But what they did, kind of nobody else did, and they did it better than anybody else. My first time out there, I was not part of the deal. I was kind of there to integrate them after the deal was done. I don't get this one. This is not. There's a cultural mismatch here with these two firms. Over communicate. Stop the whispers and rumors. You really want you don't want anybody at the water cooler talking about that kind of stuff. So employees obviously are the most valuable piece of the acquisition, and really leave these words at the doorstep. You got to the day after the deal, you can't be talking about us and them, we and they. You really gotta get people to, and you can't make people not say this, but really, as leaders in the firm, you got to change the vernacular. It's not them; they're Pannoni. We bought that firm, and they're part of us now, and so it's not a we and them. You really got to stop it, but you really gotta work on these whispers and rumors things, because employees just. If you're not communicating with them, if you're not over communicating with them, if you're not giving them all the information, they'll make it up. They will make it up. We all know that, right? I mean, they will make it up. They'll make up their own story, and it'll be the right story. So one of the things that we do is we do post-acquisition surveys. So we go, we really try to go back to the firm and say, how's it going after 1 month? How's it going after 3 months? Anything that we missed, whatever. It's just, and it's not that. It just makes the employees feel good that somebody's thinking about them and keeping them in the process of what's going on. So I think that this is another important thing. What's in a name? Can we keep our name? This first date, if I brought that first date thing, this is the very first question. How long can we? My name's been out there. We spent a long time building this brand. Everybody knows us. We can't get rid of the name. I agree. We all agree. But there are two schools of thought to this. So again, just so you know that there are two schools of thought to this. Our culture is that we agree. You built the brand, and we want to keep that brand going. Why would we want to walk away from somebody that's built a brand for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? That's kind of what we're buying. It's the most commonly I've seen it kill deals, because there are companies out there that say, no, we purchased you. The day we purchased you, you use our name. We had a very difficult time with that. Again, it's my personal experience. When Stantec purchased Volmer, and even going back, I mean, when I did my merger with Vollmer, in my market, nobody knew Vollmer, so they allowed me to keep my name Brandywine. And when I felt like it had run its course, and I had educated my clients to the fact that we were them and they were us, then we dropped the name. When Stantec purchased Vollmer, I had never heard of Stantec myself until I met them in October of 2006. They found out they were a Canadian company. I learned a lot about them since, and certainly we've all heard more about them since. But I didn't really. So I now was forced, because they said, April 1st, 2007, you are now Stantec. Now I had to, nobody knew Stantec. It was just a foreign name in the Southeast Pennsylvania market that I was in, but I was forced now to go out and market that name and educate all my clients as to what happened, why it happened. There wasn't this gradual transition. So there are a lot of firms that kind of do that. So, the two schools of thought: you cut the head off the snake or you let it live longer. I'm of the live longer opinion, because I just think that why would you want to do away with all that branding and all that work that's kind of out there? So there's no real correct answer. Some firms won't negotiate it, and others have no issues. In the end, like other parts of the deal, both sides have to be comfortable with the outcome. So this is kind of one of the things that we just did. These are our last 4 most recent acquisitions that we made, and we just did a rebrand of our company. And so we were able to use the rebrand to, any one of these companies could have rebranded on their own. So we were able to take the rebrand and take their corporate logos and kind of keep them and work a division of Pannoni right into it. And very subtle, right? And over time, we have a plan. It's got to be part of your integration plan to say, when are you going to lose those logos? Sometimes they'll get smaller. You'll do more and more in terms of community events and introducing the corporate name more than but there are ways to make the transition, and everybody is a win-win. So we're very happy with the ability to sort of rebrand them with our rebrand. I'm not an owner anymore. Okay, both sides have to be sensitive to this issue. Okay, owners are used to being in charge, and they're used to being pampered. I was an owner. Everybody in the office did whatever I asked them to do whenever I wanted them to do it, because I was the owner. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's the way. That's the way it works if you're an owner. So they have to realize that they won't be able to call the shots. You're not the owner anymore. So you're not the owner anymore. So that's kind of the cultural thing that you have to work with, and you have to work around it. But owners have to realize that they don't make all the decisions that they used to make. But on the other side, the buyer has to realize that pick your battles. Okay, if the owner was used to doing things a certain way, is that a battle that I want to fight today, or can we fight that another day? So I always say that pick your battles down the road, live to die another day. It's just something you don't have to work with. But this is an issue that is often out there with acquisitions. Cross-pollinate whenever possible. This is the best way to integrate a company, is to cross-pollinate. Have an integration plan. Bad things can happen when they're not planned. Okay, so you really have to every single detail. What are we going to do? We're gonna have an event here, and we're gonna bring management over here on this time, and we're gonna go back and visit here, and we're gonna have employee surveys at this time. So, yep.
What is the integration plan talked about or agreed on?
When we lock down the deal, okay, then we have an integration plan. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and everybody that's involved on both sides of the deal is on that. Everybody's got responsibilities. Our HR department knows what their responsibilities are. Our marketing group knows what their responsibilities are. On the flip side of the deal, the sellers know what their responsibilities are. So it's all worked out on a plan, even to the point of trying to decide where down the road do we think that we can phase out the name. All that kind of stuff is part of the plan. But once we have the deal kind of locked down, we immediately, we have a template, and we just start to fill in the template, because every deal is going to be different, and every deal's going to have different pieces of integration.
Is that, in other words, do you share that plan before the purchase agreement or after?
After. Yeah, I don't think you have to. I mean, again, I can start on piece of. If I feel like the deal's going in the right direction, I'm going to start on it, right, and start a high-level piece of it, because facilities folks have to be involved. IT is God, all the things you have to do in terms of integration on the IT side of things, websites and switching over email addresses and the ability to keep email going and keeping it live for how long, it's almost got to be forever. So there's so many things that you got to work on the IT side. And the more time you give them, hopefully you don't have a deal that's going down to the wire and then, all of a sudden, so if you know it's going in the right direction, I'll start on the integration plan and I'll pull my team together and say, but remember that you've got NDA signed and even internally, we're not disclosing the deal, right, on our side of the deal. So I can't bring that team together too quickly and say, because as soon as I put that deal on the table, they got to know the geography, they got to know the name of the firm, and then once that happens, you can't have it slip in the back door of the firm you're buying because they haven't told their employees yet. And I've had that happen to me one time, and it was very embarrassing. So you don't want to. But so there's a lot of cat and mouse kind of going on type stuff. If you're the seller, know your role and encourage your staff to engage. I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got coming into Stantec from their CEO, he came down to our offices and he kind of announced that it was the big announcement that we made. And he said that Stantec is like a big sandbox. You can stay in your corner and play with your toys and that's your career and do very well. Or you can get out in the middle of the sandbox and play with everybody else's toys and really sort of blossom as an employee. And I think that to me that's where that kind of comes from. I think that was great advice. Is that the more the employees engage and kind of work themselves, they have an obligation too to spread themselves across the new universe and make people know that they're there. And so you really want that to be as much of a two-way street as you possibly can. Spend as much time as the seller, spend as much time as you can with the new firm and make sure your staff, everybody engages. One of the things I like to do is peer-to-peer matchups, right? You take the 30 people in the firm you're buying and you find them a buddy and the matchup has to be peer-to-peer. Junior engineer to junior engineer, HR to HR, marketing to marketing, senior engineer to senior engineer. Because you're going to have questions. They're going to go back and forth. And again, you don't want that rumor mill starting at the water cooler kind of stuff. So match them up and let them ask their to me or to any, they may seem like really stupid questions, but to them they're very, how do I do my expense report? How do I show this on an expense report? I got this project, I'm not sure how I put this, how do I open a project number? I mean, these are all kind of questions that people are going to have, and it's best to just match them up buddy to buddy and let them work that out. First of all, it creates that cross-pollination. So it's a big help in sort of getting people to talk at their own level and knowing that they got a friend out there they can ask questions to. Mike?
Joe, you talk about peer-to-peer. Sometimes when you have an acquisition or merger, you're going to have duplication of some of those internal services there. How have you guys dealt with that? Because maybe one of the people aren't going to be there when the acquisition happens.
Yeah, by the time we get to that part of the deal, we know if there's some folks that aren't going to survive. Again, we're not, especially technical staff, very, very, very rarely are going to not carry over technical staff. There may be administrative staff that doesn't survive the transition. Or there may be, and another part of this too is what I always say, there may be technical staff that the firm, that the seller really wanted to get rid of. This is really not a good employee. Now's the time to, in transparency piece of the thing, put that on the table right now and let's work out a way for that so that employee does not become part of it. So.
You're not going to need 2 HR directors.
No.
You're not going to need 2 IT
Right.
directors.
Right. So that part is going to be handled before they're kind of given their buddy, right? Because you know that person's not going to survive the deal. Video introductions. I mean, we try to do a video, again, at all levels of the company to say, welcome to Pannoni. These are kind of things that are going on. And introduce the junior staff, not just the senior level. This is where the internal relationships will pay dividends down the road. You really want them. So in the video, we don't have the president of our company saying, welcome. We have, the junior person in our HR department. I'm Jessica, and this is kind of, I'm here to help you. This is what I do for the HR department, stuff like that. We have a founders group at Pannoni, and this is kind of what we do is we take advantage as that's our company president in the far end of the table, and we have this founders group that because we think that the companies that we're buying are all entrepreneurial kind of people, and so we want to keep that entrepreneurial. So we bring them together every once in a while, and
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Jim Madani. One day I met Chuck at a dinner, and we started talking. And he said, "Look, how's things going?" I said, "I'm actually looking for people, transportation, environmental." He said, "Well, so are we." He said, "If you're looking, why don't we just get together? So I hadn't even thought about it, to be honest with you, merging with another firm. I know Joe can attest to this. You know everybody in this business. You know all the different firms out there, and you just say, wait, if I had to merge with somebody, who would it be? I didn't know Tony at the time, and Chuck said to me, so I went and had breakfast with our president. 5-minute conversation with Tony, and I realized, yeah, this is the company I wanted to be with. So here I am. Here we are.
So we don't want to take, that's a lot of institutional knowledge out there that we don't want to get rid of. So we kind of have this meeting every once in a while. So I know I got the time thing, we're on the end. So last week, whether a buyer or seller, expect remorseful feelings. Be prepared to deal with them. I know it's a hard analogy, but you buy a refrigerator, it really look good on the floor, I bring it home and the ice maker doesn't work like I thought it was, whatever the case may be. Problems arise and they will arise. Meet them head on. Nothing cures itself but the common cold. So you don't really want to sweep things under. Meet early and often to discuss how it's going and how it can be improved. As a seller, you get to leave the headaches behind, embrace your new role and find your niche. I don't have to worry about HR anymore. I don't have to worry about going to the bank. I don't have to worry about dealing with all these things. So now you got a new role, so embrace it and move on. And then as a buyer, you should learn something from every deal so that you can improve the next time. I know that going back to the integration stuff, every time we do it. So the takeaways. Determine your position, buyer or seller, strategic buyer. Spend quality time on the due diligence. That's really where the rubber meets the road. Transparency. Nothing, if you think you're going to hide it, it's just going to come back to bite you later on. So neither side you have to be totally transparent in all aspects of the deal. Change doesn't happen overnight. Be patient and embrace the lessons learned. And this is the firm we purchased in Florida. So this is we gave company T-shirts with our 50th logo on them to everybody, and this was we did this acquisition a year ago. That's all of them wearing the shirts. We're going into our 50th year, so just another way to integrate. And I'm getting ready to go down there next week for their Christmas party again, just to show support from the corporate end of the business. So that's it. I know we had a couple questions on the end. If everybody has to leave, fine. Any questions, I'm here to answer them. But thank you for attending.